Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. Turn on cans. So you might wonder, what's a cans? That is a name that you might have seen in my monitoring plugins. I have less reason to lean on my monitoring plugins these days, now that I've developed Meter, because some of what monitoring used to do gave you information that can also be got through Meter and so on. But this is not the cans that you find in monitoring. That was a sort of simple monoizer that's actually all-pass filters and a bit of a delay so that your sound would kind of swap spaces and get a sort of reverby quality to it, a washed out quality to it, and it's very subtle. This is not as much subtle. This is like a full-on reverb. Kind of like that. So what we've got starts out as simple as that. That's our Studio C, diffuse at 0, damping at 1, crossfade at 0, dry wet at 1. This is as close as you can get to a really primitive sort of reverb. And all of these controls work to help that serve its purpose better. And the purpose is to do the thing that people are getting some use out of, taking the processing and making it work better for you so you can hear stuff over headphones, and that's why it's called cans. Not that that is the only thing you can do with it, mind you, but here's where we'll start. You got Studio A, very, very small room. Notice that if you turn it up all the way, that's very obviously a big pile of fake reverb. Studio B is a little bit larger. You'll hear a different quality each time. There's our Studio C. And then it continues to get bigger all the way up to Studio E. Now that's maybe too big for a control room, but if you needed to get that kind of sound, then you can do it with that. All of this is not using regeneration in the way that one of my larger reverbs would, and that's because you don't really get much of a benefit from using regeneration on an effect like this. I've got it set up so that there is no diffuse, more on that in a moment, and damping is at 1. That means we're cutting the highs as little as possible, but you don't necessarily want a control room to sound like that. If we do put in damping, it'll do this. And it'll get quite dark. That applies, of course, to all of them. And again, turn damping up and it'll start sounding a lot bouncier. Next, let's talk about crossfade. That is something that is very useful for headphone monitoring because it's going to take sounds that are starting out only in one ear and spread them out a little bit in that space. That's what happens in a real room when you're mixing stuff in a real room. It will also make stuff a lot more mono, to the point of taking away nearly everything stereo about the sound. That'll really narrow things down. You might not want to do that so much. So we've got the 0.5 setting, which I think is more or less workable in general principles. But here is the final thing, diffuse. And this is a bit new. I haven't done this before. Diffuse takes the entire reverb. Let's do it with the Studio E and everything set up to be as obvious as possible. And it starts swapping in all-pass filters for comb filters while keeping the sizes the same. It defaults to 0.5. But what this is going to do is, imagine if you have like clear coat and you're gradually evolving it into cloud coat, which is a completely different sound, more of a texture, less of a bunch of densely packed reflections. And with the process like this, I mean, the original cans in monitoring had just all-pass filters, but this one you can if you like, but then you don't have to. You can dial in the amount that sounds right to you over your headphones. And it sounds kind of like this when you play with it. All-pass filters sounds kind of textural. No all-pass filters, more of a sense of space, but more metallic. You combine all of those things, and what you've got is the difference between this and this. So that doesn't sound all that different, even though it's a pretty intense reverb being applied. However, it'll help you hear sort of the shape of the peak energy, impacts and things will set back a little because they can get past you when you're using headphones. Instead, you do something like this. Or if you wanted to go a little more extreme, pretend that you're mixing in a really big room. But who's to say you have to stop there? Because what we could do is exaggerate things a bit. Then kick in a little Airwindows Hypersoft. And you've made this sound out of this one. Just Hypersoft. Cans. So I didn't put this out instantly upon making it because I was a little concerned about whether it was actually going to help people mixing on headphones. I haven't had a lot of opportunity to test that because I haven't had much of a chance to mix anything, what with all the work I'm doing, ironically on Console X. And the fact that I don't mix on headphones anyhow. Like, that's something I really avoid. I don't trust it. But I'm in a room where I can put up speakers. I've got my little NS10s. I've made a pair of subwoofers. I'm not in an apartment, so I can afford to have, in terms of social acceptability, two 12-inch subwoofers that I built out of kits and parts and stuff. And I've set all this stuff up so that I'm pretty happy with my ability to work and or mix in the room. Anybody who's seen my streams where I do that, I hope to do more, maybe in the coming year, knows that I will go upstairs to a little seat up in a corridor by my bedroom, and the speakers are kind of firing into the back of a room and up the stairs and so on, so I get to hear a very acoustically diffuse sound. When I do that, that is the opposite of what you get to do when you're on headphones. When you're on headphones, you have exactly the opposite situation. You can't hear any of the peaks getting blurred and brought into an acoustic space. So the idea for this is to be able to let you do that a little bit more effectively. And again, I haven't had much time to test this. As near as I can tell, I think it should work. I don't know if it will necessarily work perfectly for people when everything is set to 0.5. I just tried to make that a useful setting that would not be too obtrusive and would still give you some cues for what's going on in the mix without it getting obnoxious. It's not meant to sound like a reverb on your mix, unless, of course, you do what I did with those drums and put it on something and have it, probably on Studio E, become the drum room for when you have no drum room. And the funny thing about that is I'm probably going to have to start using that myself, because I have a drum room, being that I have a spare room that is big enough to fit a drum kit in. Some people have seen it sometimes on streams, but it's such a small room that it sounds like butt. It's no good, and it's not going to give a nice sound. So rather than try to make the room sound okay or sound like a proper studio, because as much as I've got, this is not a proper studio, I just hung up a million packing blankets there and made it a dead, super ultra dead room, as if I was triggering individual samples on like a electronic drums brain or something like that. And so that puts me in the situation of having acoustic physical drums that I've made to sound the way that I want, using a lot of neat tricks. For instance, I'm using the early John Bonham trick of lining the drums with aluminum foil. That doesn't actually make them resonate more, it makes it suck out some of the sustain. So it heightens the impact and also makes a little clatter sound as you hit. I also put the drums up on a big old plywood board. So it's like a miniature substage. It's sitting on a bunch of bricks. Just a bunch of things to try to get the initial sound of the drums to actually sound cool, in my opinion. But then I have no room, because the room is much too small to be worth anything. So I've just put a bunch of packing blankets up. And now if I record there, it's a live sound, much like you heard when I was playing that track. But it's lacking completely in space. And unless I want to sound like mid-70s David Bowie albums, this would be my way of making it sound like it's in a drum room, but not in a way that particularly gets in the way or starts acting like a full-on artificial reverb. Sometimes I'm just going to need to make a little extra space around things. And I don't know what I'm going to settle on as far as what in Airwindows cans would work for me in regular mix. But I will say that it's not impossible that I'll be in situations at some times where I will want to try to mix stuff on a laptop or away from home or something like that, and I'll be on headphones, and then I might need this. So if you find any use for it, let me know what good settings would be, especially if you can compare it with some of the other products that are out there, because I know there's products out there that make a great deal of effort to be like this or that magic studio for just $50 a month subscription. My Patreon is not like that. My Patreon, you can give me money using the Patreon. That's how I was able to stay doing all of this stuff and living in a place and brought you this. But if you stop paying it, you keep it with the source code and the right to develop your own plugins based on the ones that I make, if you so desire. I think that's a better deal. And on that note, I'll talk to you later because I got to get back to my work. Bye-bye.